Prog Noggins? Dave here. You are on Bleeding Edge. Thank you for joining me. So, I like to experiment a little bit. I like to do new little things. Sometimes I dip into reaction videos. I haven't done a song reaction in quite a while, but I think I may try to get back into that if I can fit it in. I recently did a reaction video to the Prog Magazine's Prog Tracks of the Week, which was kind of fun. Check that out if you haven't had a chance. I do some brief check-ins on all 7 of the options they have, and then I do a full reaction to one of those, the one I chose to vote for. And it was kind of an interesting experiment. It's a fun dip into how many copyright claims you can have in one video, but I'm working around that. So we might keep that going a little bit. Meanwhile, digging into my own subscriber feed and checking out videos that I like to follow, I came across one recently, friend Scot laid at the Prog Corner. And if you're watching my videos and you haven't been watching his videos, you need to do that because Scot is a guru when it comes to prog rock. He knows his stuff, and he certainly has a very deep knowledge, and he's got a lot of energy, a lot of personality he packs into those short videos. So check him out if you haven't already done so. I don't know how you're here and you haven't been there yet, but usually I would think it would be the opposite. Meanwhile, Scot put out a list of his top 10 unpopular opinions, controversial opinions about prog rock. And check that out, of course. Curious to see what he had to say. And, of course, as I'm watching that, I've got my own reactions to his opinions. And I get to thinking, I'm going to drop a comment in there. And then I thought, might be more fun, actually, to kind of do a reaction video to his list. And I can just talk myself about my opinions on his opinions. So I thought that would be a fun thing to do. So that's what we're going to dig into a little bit here. We're going to take a look at what Scot has to say about various prog topics. And I will share my reactions to his opinions, my opinions for his opinions. We'll see how that goes. Could be interesting. And all right, let's get him going here.
As I talk about 10 controversial opinions I might have about music, and I'm going to kind of keep them music related. I'm going to try to keep it prog related because I tend to go off on tangents and forget that this channel is called the Prog Corner sometimes, right? So I'm going to keep it mostly prog related. So I'm not going to be talking about how Joe Jackson is infinitely better than Elvis Costello, although...
Say what? We might need to circle back to that at some point in time. Disagree.
I could, right? And I'm going to try to keep it more or less kind of controversial opinions. So, I hate death growls isn't going to be on there because, most of the people that watch my channel agree with me. They're terrible. You don't need the death growls at all. You need it to be heavy, right? Maiden doesn't use death growls, right?
All right, Scot, I'm calling you out. This is your old man shouting at the clouds moment here. Not even into the controversial opinions yet. I will say overall I agree with you. I am very much more a fan of clean vocals than I am harsh vocals. And there are occasions where I feel like the harsh vocals work pretty well. But I usually need at least the balance to be no more than 50-50, but probably more like about 60-40, 70-30 in favor of clean vocals, with the harsh vocals being used more as embellishments. Now, certain people get away with it better than others, such as a certain Michael Ackerfeld of Opeth. I can get along with his growls a bit, but he balances it out, especially in the more recent stuff, with the wonderful smooth baritone of his. But that's where it's shifting. The metal stuff is shifting towards the idea that if you don't have harsh vocals, you're not going to be considered metal. And everybody's throwing them in there. I love people like Tatiana Schmeilek of Ginger. She's amazing the way she can switch from these wonderful clean vocals to these harsh vocals on a dime. I've seen her do it live. She's wonderful. I don't always love everything they do. If like the song is almost like 80% harsh vocals, they kind of lose me. I know that's been a barrier for me for enjoying Miss Sugar more, is the fact that I don't enjoy the harsh vocals. So on one hand, I'm with you. On the other hand, both of us bitching about it is really maybe a pair of old men shouting at clouds, is what it is.
Right. At number 10. Yeah, I just said it. Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden is a prog band, and they've always been a prog band. And I hear a lot of people say, well, their first 2 albums were like kind of punk with Paul Di'Anno and whatnot. Phantom of the Opera was on that first album, and if you don't think that's prog, I can't help you. You're in the wrong place, right? And all the way through their catalog, they always had proggy stuff, right? They always did. Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Alexander the Great, and then you get into the reunion records. I mean, all of them are super proggy. You look at the song lengths, that tells you everything you need to know. And Bruce Dickinson and Steve Harris, ginormous fans of Genesis, Jethro Tull, Nectar. Yeah, Iron Maiden's prog. Get over it. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. At number.
Well, I don't know if I'm smoking anything, but I think at this point in time, I don't know, Scott, you promised me controversial opinions. I don't know that that one's that controversial, but I think I probably would have to check in with the metal crowd a little bit. My crowd tends to be not quite that level and a bit more prog-oriented here and there. My girlfriend, for example, is absolutely a prog nerd, along with the two of us. But she's also absolutely a metalhead and loves Iron Maiden and will travel all over the place to see them. And trying to think if she and I have had extensive conversations about it, but I think I'm almost certain she has said she agrees. I got to say to it, in a sense, I agree, and I'm doing that from a point really of ignorance and only knowing them on a superficial level. I will have to admit, in my formative years, middle school, late elementary school, as Iron Maiden is hitting things out there, I was scared. They scared me. The whole satanic panic thing going on around then, and they had all these devil-y type images. Yeah, they kind of freaked me out a little bit. So I kind of blew them off. I'll also say I think maybe what put me off a little bit as well is, one, I probably wasn't ready for anything that heavy, but two, here's my controversial opinion. I've never been that big a fan of Bruce Dickinson's vocals. I feel like he's shouting, singing to the rafters on every note. And I think it feels like you're wearing me out, dude. Like I don't know. Do you have subtlety in there? And I have to admit, part of that is I only know them on a rather superficial level. I know the songs that are very well known. I love Run for the Hills, or Run to the Hills. I don't know. Pick the preposition that fits, and all that. And there's some other stuff in there that's kind of okay, but I don't love them. And I probably could do a deep dive. However, from what I do know, you're right, extended compositions, conceptual pieces, literary inspirations and historical inspirations, conceptual albums. It's hard to argue against them having at least a very strong prog influence in their metal. They've usually been categorized more as power metal, but power metal and prog can oftentimes be very adjacent. The level of musicianship and instrumentation that goes on. So, yes, I think you make a good point. I don't know if they are 100% in the prog realm, but they are, in my mind, absolutely prog adjacent. So I'm going to agree with you on that one. Not that controversial.
Number 9. I bet you noticed a wall of Kansas behind me. Oh, yeah, boys and girls, this Sunday.
It is kind of conspicuous.
We're going to do a Kansas episode talking about how Kansas is prog. I'm going to have to try to convince you clowns because some of you still don't get it. Kansas is a prog band through and through.
Yeah,
they had a couple of hits.
Your upcoming video, by the way.
So what?
Like you need.
Yes had a couple of hits too. Nobody's saying, oh, Yes isn't a prog band. That's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. So yeah, we're going to have the great Jake Livgren with us, the lead singer from Emerald City Council, who's also the nephew of the great Kerry Livgren, going to be on the show. Absolutely excited about it. But Kansas at number 9, my controversial opinion about Kansas. You know what it is. Like I said, you absolutely do. If you're a normal, regular viewer of this channel, you absolutely know how I feel about that Kansas debut. I believe that the Kansas debut is the best American album ever released. You can take that, Miles Davis. You can take that, Frank Zappa, or the Beach Boys, or, your Eagles, or, your Van Halens of the world. The best American album ever released came out in 1974.
Okay, so again, I thought you were promising rather controversial takes. I think the only thing controversial about that is my own confusion that if you're somebody that really is deep into prog and you know prog really well, how's this a question for you? Of course Kansas is prog. How's anybody doubting that? The only thing I can figure is that somebody that is doubting that is somebody that I guess really doesn't yet know them very well. Somebody that maybe mostly knows them from what's played on the radio or what's on their greatest hits album. And one would expect that they got categorized with AOR at the end of the 70s and, thrown in with Bands like Styx, who I would also argue are definitely prog. Not always in every song, but yeah, if you dig into Styx catalog, they're prog as well. I would, of course, maybe take the argument of them being not prog more so than Kansas, because I think Kansas maybe is a little bit more, but it's, it's splitting hairs, I think, at that point in time. So I don't understand why it even needs to be said, and people need to be convinced. Of course, Kansas is prog. I'm still taken aback by that one. Now, Subpoint A, that their debut was the greatest American rock album ever released. I don't know. I'm not as familiar with that album as maybe I could be. And I'm probably going to say, I don't know. I kind of doubt that. I don't know that I am going to agree with you on that one. But maybe I need to give a re-listen. Maybe I need to check it out once again, because there's so many great American albums out there. And boy, that's a tall order to fill if you're going to tell me that's in and of itself easily the greatest ever. But I know you enjoy it. I know you love it. And you might be alone on that hill.
At number 8, here's something else I believe. All the time I just did a Sunday show about the worst albums that the Big Six put in. Yes, Genesis, ELP, King Crimson, Jethro Tull, and Pink Floyd. And for a lot of people, Abacab is the worst album for Genesis, and they're dead wrong. Abacab's a good album. Forget about it. It is a good album. I know coming on the heels of Duke, I was a little bit pissed off. I'm not going to lie. When Abacab hit, I was working in the record store, and I was so excited. Oh, man, one of my favorite bands has put out a brand new album, and I put it on, and where's the prog? There's no prog here. Well, there is. There is prog all the way through Abacab and self-titled. Maybe not as much on Invisible Touch, but there's a little bit there. And on We Can't Dance too. Genesis never gave up the prog. But let's talk about Abacab for a second, man. What's the problem with it? Why don't you guys like it? What don't you like about that title track that opens it up? What a groove. What a great groove, man.
Dude, I'm with you on this one as well. I've never fully understood the deep, ingrained level of hatred that some Genesis fans have for Abacab specifically. The band was already evolving by that point in time, so it's not like they did this sudden heel turn and went from this deeply prog band a la Lamb Lies Down on Broadway and suddenly popped up with Mama. It's not that big a diversion or a departure. I don't think so. I'm also going to admit that I maybe have some bias. I have a little nostalgic bias. That was my jumping on point for Genesis. Yes, I was familiar with Turn It On Again and Misunderstanding and all that, but that was my first Genesis album. And to me, based on what I heard on the radio, and at the time not recognizing Genesis necessarily as prog, nor was I necessarily at that point developmentally even aware of or understanding of the concept of prog rock. I just knew music. And Genesis was great music. And I found Abacab to be a very satisfying album. And you're right, the title track's a great song. Me and Sarah Jane love that song. That's got all the whimsy and progginess of older Genesis in it. No Reply at All is quite the enjoyable song, although definitely you could see the Genesis was kind of evolving more towards pop at that point in time. But that had already started. Please don't. Somebody wants to act like somehow or other that Duke was the equivalent of Foxtrot in its progginess. No, please stop. It just, I don't know. Somewhere along the line, I'm not quite clear what the hatred was, other than maybe this was the album that probably most was developing in that realm, where Phil Collins was most starting to assert himself in many ways in terms of production and sound, bringing in the Tower of Power horns and everything. I don't know. I've never fully understood it. I know there's a gentleman out there in social media land known as Phil, primarily prog, who absolutely will not only die on the hill, but be buried on the hill, have his tombstone on the hill, that Abacab is a horrible, terrible album, objectively speaking. There's no arguing with him. You and I are, I think, on the same page with this. I don't know that I fully agree. I'm not too sure about anything as far as Invisible Touch and We Can't Dance. I have a deep hatred for We Can't Dance. At least the singles from it. I was working top 40 radio at that time on Air Talent, believe it or not. and had to play those god-awful singles. I Can't Dance, No Son of Mine, which actually wasn't that terrible, but, after about 30 plays, it gets old. And whatever else. It was horrible. I Can't Dance is an abomination. Shouldn't exist. I may need to reconsider some aspects of the album, I am told. Might get around to doing that sometime soon. But I'm with you. I don't understand the hatred. I think it's way exaggerated. I don't know. Maybe it's just because at that point in time, Genesis added in some new wave influences, and really very much even the album artwork was a big departure from what they used to do. And maybe that turned people off. I don't know. I don't get it. Old men screaming at clouds. I don't know.
Number 7 for my hot takes episode, right? This is controversial prog opinions.
Me controversial.
And at number 7, I believe that Italian prog is every bit as good as British prog. Every bit as good. It's not better because, let's be honest. What's better than British prog rock, right? Absolutely nothing. The greatest music ever written in the history of mankind occurred in the UK in the late 60s and early 70s. That's not even up for debate, right? So we don't include that as one of our 10 controversial opinions. But I believe that the Italian scene was every bit as good, and honestly, from top to bottom, right? Maybe you didn't have bands as good as Yes or Genesis or King Crimson, but PFM, Leormi, and Banco del Maturo Socosa come awfully close. And if you look down at like the minor leagues, might even be better, right?
Okay. All I can do at this point in time is plead ignorance. It sounds like I think you're talking exclusively in the 70s as far as the Italian prog scene, because you use terms like was and past tense. I have no idea. That is outside the realm of my knowledge. I've never had the chance to dig into that. I am very much not knowledgeable on it. I will defer to your greater knowledge with the simply saying, I don't know. Je ne sais quoi. No, that's not the word. I don't know. It is, no, I wasn't attempt Italian. I only know French and even un peu. Anyway, so I'll go with you on that one, dude. I don't know. You could be very well right. You know much more about it than I do.
Okay, at number 6, In the Court of the Crimson King was not the first prog album. It was not. It was the first, maybe perhaps the very first fully formed, fully fleshed prog statement. But I think you're doing the Moody Booze. You're doing the Moody Booze a whole disservice by not.
God bless you for keeping in the stumble there. It's so nice to see that I'm not the only one at times who loses the power of speech and can't talk the way he wants to. So thank you for not editing that in there, or editing that out of there. See? Lost the power of speech right there.
Not talking about them, or The Nice, or Procol Harum. There were all kinds of proggy bands. Okay, maybe it was proto-prog. It wasn't 100% what we call prog rock, but those bands were progressive. They were doing sidelong epics. They were mixing classical elements with rock. All the things we talk about with prog rock. It didn't start in 1969. Do your homework.
I will say, perfectly articulated. Exactly what I would say as well. You promised me controversial opinions. So far, you're not pissing me off, Scott. Come on, man. Throw me something I can chew on. Anyway, I gotta agree. There was progressive rock brewing. What I will say, and a slight rewording of what you said, King Crimson, I think, represented that point in time where progressive rock, the first progressive album that embodied all the elements that we came to know as progressive rock. So yes, the conceptual elements in terms of songwriting, the extended compositions, the blending of other genres and other elements into the music. And what King Crimson, I think, really brought to the forefront more than any of those other bands was the top-notch virtuoso musicianship. That was the point where the final piece to the puzzle that defined what prog rock was to be known as came in. They brought that in there. These top-notch virtuoso musicians who just absolutely blew the doors off in terms of talent and skill, doing these high-minded conceptual pieces, these long extended suites of songs, all that stuff. King Crimson was that point where it all coalesced into what we came to know as prog rock, progressive rock. So Yeah, I agree. The other ones were there. They were building things. Certainly Days of Future Past probably, represents maybe the first prog album in many ways because of all those other elements. But King Crimson brought the final piece to the puzzle, and therefore, agreed, seminal album.
At number 5. This is one I've never verbalized. I did my top drummers ranking, and just almost like reflexively, like instinctively, like I've got phantom limb syndrome, right? Carl Palmer's got to be in the top 10. Why? Why does he have to be in the top 10? I'm going back and listening to all my ELP records, and I think Carl might have been in over his head. I think he might have been in over his head with that band. Greg and Keith were operating on such a high level, and Carl's playing is really stiff. It has no swing to it at all. I do like it, like particularly on albums like Brain Cell and Surgery, where the subject matter is so dark and dystopian that Carl's mechanical drum playing kind of fits. But he's got no feel, he's got no swing, and nothing changed, man. Listen to those Asia albums, right? A big reason why they plod the way they plod is because of Carl. Oh, I hated to say it, but it is true. It is true. Carl Palmer's a good drummer, but he's not a great drummer. He is vastly overrated, and he was completely in over his head with Emerson, Lake, and Palmer. Okay, I said it. I'm sorry, Carl. At number...
Well, at least you apologized. You dissed the one final remaining member of the band. The only guy alive to know you dissed him. Jeez, Scott, that's a little heartless, dude. I don't have an opinion on this at this point in time. You could well be right. It's not something where I've done a ranking. I know you did a ranking, but it sounds like maybe it's time for you to reconsider that ranking. I will say that I probably also need to go back and listen to some of those ELP albums and maybe, take a different listen and give it another review from a later vantage point in life where maybe I've got a little bit more knowledge and they've been exposed to a little bit more. Because I don't know. I am much, much more familiar with the Asia albums because actually I jumped on with Asia. I was not familiar with prog as a concept, much less as a slate of bands. So I certainly never was one to favor ELP amongst the classic bands. They probably, were number 6 or 7 out of 7 for my favorites. And just because the music is like the other band's music better. I'm with you. I much more prefer Yes. But I need to go re-listen. But I can remember, especially at this point in time later in life, and I go back and re-listen to those Asia albums, whether by design or capability, I don't know. The drumming isn't massively impressive. It is not massively complex, but it wasn't meant to be, I think, for those songs. So he's probably not showcasing the full scope of his abilities by intent. And, there's at least a little bit there where he gets a drum solo in the midst of Wildest Dreams that is a really cool drum solo. But if I want to compare something like that, or his drum solo that, comes to mind too, and, when I thought he would be showing off for Roger Daltrey's tribute to Keith Moon, Under a Raging Moon, they've got a collection of drummers on there, doesn't even hold a candle to, say, a Neil Peart solo. I mean, just doesn't. It... Agreed. Seems by comparison much less imaginative, much more stiff, much more simplistic. Still impressive, well beyond anything I could have done at the height of my drumming skills. But yeah, you may have a point there. However, then I think the challenge is evidence. For me, I would have to say I would almost need to go back and make an intentional list of prog drummers. And I gather we're talking about just prog drummers, so we would exclude people like Keith Moon and, John Bonham, there we go, from that list because they weren't really prog. Zeppelin kind of dips into prog. And actually, there's been an argument made by my girlfriend, no less, that The Who actually invented both prog rock and punk rock at the same time. There's a thought to digest. Might be good for a discussion at some point in time. So maybe you could include them in there, but let's say for the sake of argument, since neither of those are traditionally prog bands, you would exclude them, then the challenge is to come up with 10 drummers that you at least think are better than Carl, pushing him to no higher than 11. I haven't done it. And from what you said, it sounds like you haven't done it. So there's the challenge. Maybe we need to do those lists. I don't tend to do a lot of lists. I know that's more your thing. I do other things, but It's an interesting thought. And, you might be right. But I have to actually make a list for myself to find out whether or not I would place him that low. And yeah, sorry, Carl.
Number four, the only music worth listening to, popular music, rock music. The only rock music worth listening to happened after Sgt. Pepper. And, maybe Revolver. Okay, well, we'll throw Revolver. Okay. Revolver. That's the point right there, where everything after Revolver is worth listening to. Everything before Revolver is not worth listening to. There's exceptions, obviously. There's plenty of great stuff that came out in the 50s and early 60s. I guess I haven't heard any of it, but people say there's great stuff there. So I'll take their advice and I'll believe them when they tell me that. But I have not heard any evidence that there was any good music that came out, at least like popular music, in the 50s and early 60s. It was just a bunch of garbage. I didn't like it. But then the Beatles came along and Revolver and Sgt. Pepper changed everything. Now all of a sudden rock bands could view rock music differently, right? It was an art form. And the album itself became an art form because of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And that was the genesis for a lot of great prog music, right? The idea that music was art, rock music was art, and your canvas is the album. Now you have a
Okay. That is an interesting take, I guess. Could be a bit controversial. I can't help but think that there's a lot of love for albums out there, and forgive me if I don't have my timeline firmly in place. I don't have time to look it up right now, but, I can't think of a lot of stuff that I dearly love from before 1966 when Revolver came out. I will say, though, I'm pretty certain the Kinks, the Who, the Animals put out some pretty damn good stuff. It's not prog, of course, but I don't think that's what we're talking about. So I'm probably going to have to disagree with you a little bit here. But I do that without researching things. And I tend to hesitate with too many generalizations. So, but, I can think of things like well before that, the Everly Brothers put out some really great music, loved their vocal harmonies. That existed prior to this. There certainly was some stuff building up there that I think would have gone somewhere, but and I'm not sure what your dislike of the Beach Boys is about.
The Beach Boys changed nothing.
Because I know you named them once or twice in this specifically. So but majoritively, what I'm going to go back and listen to, yes, it doesn't even go as far back as Revolver on a regular basis. But I agree, and I do say that there really is, you can't doubt the influence of the Beatles at that particular time in terms of expanding what people thought you could do with rock music and expanding the palette that people could use to create rock music. I think I agree to a large extent. It's hard to say for sure, but the timeline certainly strongly suggests that the Beatles doing what they did influenced other people to expand into psychedelia, eventually into metal, eventually into prog rock, all of that stuff. I think to a degree, the door was opened by the Beatles. I can't disagree with that. So I don't know, Scott, you really haven't pissed me off yet, man. Do something to piss me off.
Okay, at number 3. For my hot takes, man. My brain works a little bit differently than most people's. But at number 3, I believe that modern prog as a whole is better than classic prog. And hear me out. There's no band as good as Yes. There's no band as good as Genesis. There's no band as good as King Crimson. I get that. I understand that. But, Bill Bruford talked about the early 60s, late 60s, rather, early 70s, about how music had a lot of slack in the rope because there was a lot of stuff people hadn't done before, a lot of stuff people hadn't tried before. So once all the slack got pulled out of the rope, it got really, really hard to be original, to be creative, to do things a little bit differently, right? But the modern prog rock scene is definitely taking those cues from, the golden era, but they're also utilizing modern technology, modern soundscapes, modern guitar tones, modern drum sounds. And we can argue that, maybe sonically we don't approve of those choices, but let's be honest, the bands that are around right now, right? If you're a prog band in 2026, you're not creating music albums, songs. You're not doing all that because you think you're going to get rich from it, right? And a lot of those bands in the golden era, they were. So they were thinking about money. They were thinking about commerce. They were thinking about the A&R guy from the label coming in the studio and giving them a hard time about this song or that, chord progression. And the bands of today have none of that. They have no commercial concerns if they are plying in the prog rock trade, because let's face it, it's analogous to beating your head against the wall. You work really, really hard and you see absolutely no positive result from it. That's prog rock.
Oh, that is an interesting take. And I have to agree. I think to some certain extent, you almost certainly are pissing some people off with that one. That's a pretty controversial one, I say, objectively speaking. And to a degree, largely, I probably also agree with you. But you make some good points. One, prog rock back then was brand new, and people could kind of do whatever they wanted to do, and they were creating the genre. And in some ways, that gave them a lot more freedom to move, and they got to discover all the new ground that bands could only retread later. It's hard to discover a lot of new ground then, although a lot of bands are doing it. Also, I only partly agree with the commercial thing, but you're right. Like, nobody in the world of prog in this day and age is expecting a top 10 hit, either album or song. They are much more doing it for passion, for love of the genre, for love of the musical style, and that's where their muse leads them. Whereas, bands back then absolutely were living high on the hog. They were making the big ones, the ones that had the big hits, especially like if you talk about Yes or Genesis. They made gobs of money at a certain point in time, and they were absolutely top of the charts, and they were absolutely famous rock stars. And hell, to a degree that they helped accidentally create punk as a reaction to them. And this day and age, they really can't expect that too much unless you're Sleep Token. And I'm sure a lot of people will want to debate exactly how prog they really are or are not. I know you're not generally a guy that dips too much into the metal side of things. But, it's very, very hard as a progressive rock, progressive metal band in this day and age to have any chance of making big, big bucks. So you're doing it much more for passion. That changes the dynamic a little bit, but I also think in some ways that could be a little bit liberating. But I do think it might be a stretch to say they have no commercial concerns whatsoever. I've talked to a couple of people recently that they absolutely have some concerns about how much money it's going to cost in the tour and how much money they might lose or make on that tour. And the fact that they aren't selling tons and tons of albums, and a lot of them have day jobs. I don't think Steve Howe and John Anderson had day jobs much back in the day. These guys maybe are also working other jobs and doing side hustles or whatever you want to say. So, yeah, the landscape has changed a little bit. I'm not sure what you mean when you say as good as. I think the overall genre is at least as healthy as it's ever been in terms of variety and artists working and fan base that supports them to a large extent. I think absolutely it's there. Obviously, it's not as big a fan base as it might have been back in the 70s, but I think it's good and solid, and I think there's a lot of health in it. If you're talking good in terms of skill and musicianship, I have to disagree with you a little bit there. I think there are a lot of bands out there that are absolutely musically, instrumentally as talented as those bands back then. And as long as there's a band like Dream Theater around, there's the equivalent of a Yes. I think Dream Theater can, pound for pound, may be, as far as virtuosity, the most talented band to ever exist. Just from top to bottom, every member of the band, nobody is slack. Granted, Yes is absolutely a direct challenger to there, but I might put them on the same level. Hard to say, but I mean, I would argue Petrucci, especially when he's not hanging his hat on blistering solos, is a guy that has, I think, a wider breadth of, that's the word I'm looking for, a more broad breadth, a more deeper depth. Some of these words we'll put together in a way that makes a sentence. But anyway, I think he's got a wider skill range. There we go. Than Steve Howe. Yeah, I said that. There's my controversial opinion. I think Petrucci's skill set exceeds that of Steve Howe, because I think Steve has largely stayed within a certain groove and within a certain range throughout his career. And I think I could reasonably argue that Petrucci can do all of that and a whole heck of a lot more. So yeah, there I said it. And I love Steve Howe. He's always been one of my favorite guitarists. There we go. And Portnoy, I think, can keep up with a lot of the greats in the prog world. Maybe he's not a Bill Bruford. I can agree with that. Jordan Rudess. So if you're looking at that, and there's other bands out there that are deep in the talent pool that I think can go toe-to-toe with those great bands of the 70s in terms of pure skill. In terms of songwriting, I think there's a lot of equivalents out there. So yeah, I'm with you. I think overall, I think the depth of the talent pool is more than it was in the 70s. The breadth of variety and sounds and textures and all that is bigger than it was in the 70s. And I think actually there probably is a metric shit ton more people out there making prog music than there was in the 70s. And I think that all just benefits us, the listener.
At number 2, hold on, boys and girls. This is going a little long. I need a little caffeination.
Oh, fuck, we got a little bit of product placement here or something like that? Wait, where's my can of soda or something I can pull up and, hello. Buy this. Get the Mountain Dew up there. Although, at the same time, and the reference to caffeination, the thought that perhaps during the making of these videos, Scott is chugging Mountain Dew after Mountain Dew is in and of itself a bit of a revelation or confirmation.
That explains so many things.
Oh, yeah, either way, I needed that Mountain Dew. Okay, now I'm ready to go. Ooh, yeah, I got a little jolt there. Oh, yeah, the Mountain Dew did its thing. Okay. At number two, boys and girls, for my hot takes, my prog rock opinions that perhaps you share, perhaps you don't. This one is the fact that most prog rock singers are terrible. They really are. I mean, you remove yourself. I mean, think about back in the 70s, right? There were a lot of bands that were doing the prog rock. Think about the bands that kind of rose above the noise and became big old international superstars. What did they all have in common? They had good singers, right? You got a John Anderson, you got a shot, right? If John Anderson's the lead singer in your band has a shot. Peter Gabriel, if Peter Gabriel's the lead singer in your band, you got a real good chance of making it, right? Greg Lake, John Wetton. I mean, we go on and on. Even old Ian Anderson, before he blew out his pipes on the Under Wraps tour, he was a phenomenal vocalist. I mean, not a great singer per se, but what a great storyteller, right? He had a way with a melody. He had a way with a song. So yeah, the great bands, the bands that we talk about today, 50 years later, nobody's talking about, some of those second tier bands. And there's a reason why. I contend that the singing is the reason why those bands actually were able to, break through the noise and sell millions of copies and fill stadiums and all that kind of thing. The problem exists even today in modern prog. It hasn't.
All right, this one I think, yeah, you know what, we're going to have to disagree a bit on this. I get what you're talking about, and I do understand that oftentimes prog bands will have, we'll say, second-tier vocalists compared to serious pop bands or mainstream rock bands. So I'm not even sure who the mainstream rock bands are these days anymore. It feels like so much butt rock. Yeah, said that. But I don't know. I think that's an overgeneralization. I understand what you're saying, but I think there's a lot of really great singers in modern prog. And I think part of the other thing that helped bands back in the 70s wasn't just their singers, but also the fact that, one, a lot less competition in the genre. Two, it was a trendy new genre that made waves and therefore got them a lot more attention. This market wasn't quite as saturated or fractured. So, it wasn't much of a difference back then. So I think partly that they were able to be successful is, yes, they had singers with really appealing voices overall. And I think you're right. Probably the ones that didn't do as well didn't have singers who were quite as appealing. they also might not have made music that was as distinctive from those other top bands, or as enjoyable, or as whatever. Maybe they just didn't write songs that were as good. They may have written very solid songs, and they may have written very impressive songs, but maybe not had quite the pop hookiness that Yes and Genesis and all that had. So I think you might be carrying it a little bit too far there. And in a world where we've got singers like Einar Solberg and Ross Jennings and Claudio Sanchez, Steven Wilson, Michael Ackerfeld, there's so many great singers these days. And I think a lot of your top prog bands do have that in this day and age. They are the ones that stand out. Alberto Bravin certainly is a great, great singer. So I think you undersell the modern guys a little bit here on that take. And I think it may be a correlation causation thing, that I don't know that the fact that the great singers of those bands in the 70s, the bands had great singers and they had great success, but that may have been a correlation, but it may not have necessarily in and of itself been the causation. I think there probably were other factors at play. Certainly didn't hurt them at all. And you're right. I mean, if you got John Anderson, you're going to have a hard time going wrong.
Hasn't been fixed, right? Because let's face it, most singers aren't thinking, I'm a great singer. I'm one of the best singers in the world. I'm going to go do prog rock. No, you're not going to do prog rock. You're going to do something where you can make some money. It's like, if I'm a super duper athlete and I can play any sport I want to because I'm that guy, right? I'm not going to choose lacrosse. I'm picking basketball or football or something I can make a lot of money at. And it's true in the music industry. If you're a super talented person, particularly a singer, because musicians, like instrumentalists, they definitely gravitate to the prog. They always have, they always will, because musicians are just different, right? But singers, right? If you're a singer, you're probably not going to be like, man, I want to join a prog band. You're thinking, I want to, join a K-pop band or something. I want to make some money, right? I don't want to be toiling in obscurity my whole life. So the singing has always been a problem in the prog. And again, in the modern era, the bands with the best vocals seem to rise above all the rest. I think about Neil Morse, right? I think about Big Big Train with all the beautiful voices there. I think about Wobbler and how gorgeous Andres Prestmo's voice is. The bands that really rise to the top back then and today did so because of their singers, right? It's the singers that most people clue into. And you know how it is. It's no different in pop as it is in prog.
Okay, as your follow-up point, we agree a little bit more. But I think as well, too, that there's that difference. But you're right. I think to a large degree, the bands with the best singers are the ones that are going to get the most attention regardless of the genre, because it's the most appealing voice. It's the way it works.
Here we go. My most controversial opinion. Well, it's not that controversial. And I think most of you guys, if you watch the show regularly, know exactly what I'm going to say. And that is the 5 best albums in the history of mankind are in no particular order. The Yes album, Fragile, Close to the Edge, Tales from Topographic Oceans, and Relayer.
Wrong, 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 wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong.
Oh, man. I know The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway and Thick as a Brick, both very angry with me for saying that. Very, very angry. But if I got to look, okay, of those 5 Yes albums, those classic 5 Yes albums from 71 to 74 that were released in a 40-month span, which blows your mind if you think about it. In 40 months, they released that kind of stuff. But if I think about it, my least favorite of those 5 might be the Yes album. And I'm putting it up against Close to the Edge. Yeah. Fragile.
All right, here's what I'm going to say. Yes, I can be snarky and just tell you you're wrong. I am going to say that there's no doubt that the fact that they could put those 5 albums out in a 40-month span of time is just an amazing feat, and maybe the greatest 5-album run of any band that's ever been of any artist, especially if you count in the time frame. Don't know, but you know how it is. Those are all wonderful albums. I do love them, and it's hard to argue that. I don't know that I've ever made my top 10 all-time list, but there's some I'm going to put up there ahead of that. Yeah, I'm going to argue for a little bit of Rush, maybe with Signals. I'm going to argue a little bit of Dream Theater with Metropolis Part 2 or Images and Words. I'm going to argue a little bit of Porcupine Tree within Absentia or Fear of a Blank Planet or something like that. You know, Haken with Fauna. And I don't even know if I necessarily put all of those in my top 5. I've never made a top 5 list. That would be really difficult. But I know you love Yes, dude. And I love your passion for Yes. Yes is a wonderful band. And certainly that period of time was just historic in how amazing it was. So I get why you say that. And of course, as you know, everybody has an opinion. They're like assholes. We all have them and they all stink. So, and I think you know that. You say it tongue in cheek, or maybe you don't. But I would say you probably will find like 99.9% of the world is going to disagree at least with one or more of those choices. But I see where you're going, and that's all cool. I don't care. It's all fine. So what we understand, you love Yes, and who wouldn't?
I think all 5 of those Yes albums in that period are 10 out of 10 records. And the only 2 records that, you know, are angry with me about not being included are The Lamb and Thick as a Brick. I honestly think those are probably up there in the top 5. So my top 5 is really a top 7. So yeah, what do you think about that, boys and girls?
Damn it, Scott, stick with an opinion.
That's my take, man. You've heard most of them, but I just wanted to collate my weird.
There we go. All right. So my thoughts on Scott's thoughts. Interesting list you got there, Scott. I'll be honest, I thought it was going to be a bit more controversial. I thought it was going to have a lot more to rage against, to fight you against. I don't know, dude. Challenge me. Go out on a limb. Say something really off the wall. But no, it's all cool. Opinions are opinions, and a lot of these things are interesting to talk about and discuss, and you've given me some food for thought. I'm definitely going to go try and check out that Carl Palmer back catalog and see what I think about that. Maybe it challenges me to make my own list of top prog drummers and see what I come up with. Whether or not I have enough people that I can turn to and look at and go, I think they are measurably better than him and can push him into at least slot number 11. And you give me some other thoughts about things, make me wonder what songs, what bands and artists did I like before Revolver came out? Name some of them already. So, you know, generalizations. I always hesitate to go with those. So I'm curious. The rest of you that haven't already shared your thoughts on Scott's channel, which really, if you want to respond to Scott's thoughts, go on his channel, watch the video, respond there. Don't do it as much as I'm interested in hearing your discussion. I would rather hear your thoughts about my thoughts about his thoughts. Comment about my reaction to his thoughts here. But go check out his channel, the Prog Corner, if you haven't done that. I got to think you've already done that if you're here. There's no way you got to me before you got to him. But if you didn't, yeah, go check him out. Dude puts out some good stuff. And in the meantime, that's all I got for you for now. Until next time, just hang loose, never fear to deviate from the norm, and keep it proggy.